This story takes us to the heart of Melbourne, Australia, where a sinister crime sent shockwaves through the nation and forever changed a community. This is the haunting case of Jill Meagher, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. Sadly, this follows the all-too-common scenario of a woman being attacked while walking home alone at night. This case made breakthroughs in preventing violence against women. The murder of a beautiful, middle-class white woman with a job in the media brought much-needed awareness. It's important to remember so many victims that go unnoticed because they don't fit the profile of the perfect victim. If this case shows us anything, it's that all victims need the same protections and due process. Content warning: description of sexual assault and murder by strangulation. Brief mention of sexual and physical child abuse. Jill Meagher was a spirited and vivacious woman who lived in an artsy suburb of Melbourne called Brunswick, an area with 2 large colleges. It's a bustling part of town with a lively nightlife and music scene. It's generally considered a safe place to go out. Unfortunately, this neighborhood was the scene of a random act of violence that wouldn't have happened if Australia's criminal justice had worked to prevent repeat offenders from walking free and equally protected all women, no matter her background or profession. Friends described Jill as a ray of sunshine. She had a zest for life and brought joy to everyone she met. She was born in Ireland on the 30th of October 1982. She spent a large part of her childhood in Perth with her brother Michael and their parents Edith and George. Her parents from primary school there said she was a natural entertainer and was enthusiastically involved in the drama program until the family moved back to Ireland when she was 14. In 1996, they moved back to Drogheda, where Jill was born. She went to the local school in this small Irish town, where her friends described her as bright, bubbly, and vivacious. She then attended St. Oliver's Community College. She finished up her education in Ireland at University College Dublin. She was well liked by her classmates and teachers who remembered her as full of life, friendly, and radiating positivity. Despite her petite 5'1" stature, she had a larger-than-life presence and connected easily with others. She worked at a local bar, and that was where she met the love of her life, Tom Meagher. After graduating, she worked for the Irish equivalent of PBS, the Irish National Broadcaster, RTE. She married Tom in 2008, and they moved to Australia together in 2009. You may remember there was a big recession during that time, and a lot of people from Ireland moved to Australia, looking for opportunity and a fresh start. Once the Irish couple settled down under, Jill started working for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, also known as the ABC. She worked as a unit coordinator and occasionally did guest spots on the air at the 774 Melbourne ABC radio station. She had a strong relationship with her parents and brother Michael. He had moved to Canada, but no matter how far apart they were, they remained close. In September 2012, she had gone to visit her parents, who were now living in Perth, after her father had a bout of ill health. She and her husband were young and just starting their life together. By now, 29-year-old Jill was a producer and an on-air personality at ABC Radio Melbourne. She was friendly with her coworkers, and on the 21st of September, they went out for Friday drinks. She called her husband Tom and asked if he wanted to join, but he was happy to let her go out and have fun with her friends. They started out at a bar called the Brunswick Green and then ended at Bar Etiquette, a short 10-minute walk from the apartment she shared with Tom on Lux Way. They finished up the night around 1:30 a.m. A friend offered to drop Jill off in a taxi, but she turned down the offer to take her familiar short walk home. During that time, she got a few calls from her brother, but she didn't pick up. Meanwhile, Tom fell asleep on the couch, waiting for her, and woke in the early hours of the next day, the 22nd of September, only to find his wife still wasn't home. He tried calling her to no avail and knew it was unusual that she would stay out all night. So around 4 a.m., he walked outside to see if maybe she had an accident. He looked for a couple of hours to see if he could find her, but as time wore on, he grew more and more worried. Still not wanting to think the worst, but knowing something was very wrong, he called the police at 6 a.m. and reported Jill missing. The police got into action pretty quickly and set up a search of the area between their apartment and where she had last been seen, outside of bar etiquette. Detectives scoured the locations and retracted her steps. They spoke with witnesses, leaving no stones unturned to find the truth. As this was happening, her coworkers at ABC took to Twitter to get the message out about her disappearance and started a Facebook page called Help Find Jill Meagher. They also plastered posters around the neighborhood asking for any information on her whereabouts. Tom reached out to anyone that might know where she was, but no one had any information. They hadn't seen or heard from her after they all left bar etiquette that night. Jill's vanishing without a trace shook the tight-knit community and set off a frantic search effort. The Facebook page received over 100,000 likes in the first 5 days it was started. The police posters, social media, and TV coverage yielded no information about where Jill may be and what might have happened. The investigators began to worry about her safety, so they contacted her bank and cell phone provider, hoping there might be some evidence that she had chosen to go away rather than the far graver alternative. There was no evidence of any money moving in or out of her bank, but her phone had moved, and not in the direction of her apartment. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, following leads, analyzing CCTV footage, and interviewing witnesses. In the meantime, people started looking at those closest to her. Their family wasn't nearby, but all eyes looked to Tom as the potential #1 suspect. We've seen this story before, and it would have been convenient for the authorities had this been the case, but it wasn't. The thought that a random stranger could come up to someone walking home alone at night sends chills down anyone's spine. And although the majority of women are attacked by a man they know, when it's a monster lurking in the shadows who goes after an innocent, attractive young white woman, it captures the media's attention and fascinates the larger public. Online, people were convinced it was Tom. There's ample footage of massive amounts of evidence being gathered from their apartment to see if there was anything to support this notion. The investigation was just beginning, and people online were already dragging poor Tom through the mud. Nevertheless, he managed to keep his focus on finding out what happened. He continued to go on the news in hopes that it may help. Anyone paying attention, watching the news footage of him after her disappearance, should see this man is authentically distraught over his wife's disappearance. He's on the verge of tears, talking about his best friend going missing, that he knew this is not something she would do. He said he had a feeling something terrible had happened. His feeling was right. To the internet trolls' dismay, Tom was ruled out when her cell phone pinged at Hope Road near their apartment before moving north around 4:30 a.m., then cutting out in the town of Gisborne, about an hour's drive northwest of Melbourne. This was exactly when Tom was seen on CCTV, walking around their neighborhood searching for his missing wife. By that Monday, Jill had been missing for 48 hours. Besides the cell phone ping, the investigators had nothing more to go on and feared they hit a dead end. Just when things were looking hopeless, they got a 911 call from someone who found an item in the alley cutting through to the road Tom and Jill lived on. A woman's handbag with an ABC ID card inside. The police immediately brought Tom to see if these items could be confirmed as Jill's. When he said they were, the police handed the case over to the homicide squad. The crime scene specialist now on the case found several unsmoked cigarettes and an ABC logo pencil strewn on the ground nearby. A specialist saw a flattened, darkened section of grass near where the purse was found. He said that, regrettably, it looked like many scenes he had found before. The site of a sexual assault. What was strange was the handbag itself. When the police swept the alley over the weekend, the purse wasn't there. Did it just appear? Was the perpetrator messing with them? No, it turns out that a local business owner found it on Saturday morning when they were opening their store. They picked it up and forgot about it until that Monday when their daughter told them there was a crime scene nearby. So this person must have just tiptoed over to the alley and put it back. It would have been helpful to have that purse sooner, but I guess the shopkeeper ultimately made the right decision. But this handbag didn't create any new leads. They still weren't any closer to finding where Jill was or if she was even alive. The investigation took a chilling turn when the owner of a local bridal shop between bar etiquette and the Meagher's home handed over their CCTV footage. This showed a man in a blue hoodie pacing back and forth in front of the store. Later, Jill walks up to this man and starts talking to him. This made the man in the blue hoodie caught on video the prime suspect. Jill's appearance on the footage was now the last known sighting they had. This also made it highly likely that she had been taken. The police weren't sure if sharing the footage would cause the man in the blue hoodie to harm Jill, but after some deliberation, they decided to release the footage to the public to help in the search for Jill and this man in the blue hoodie. They now pivoted to focus on this suspect, who most likely had abducted Jill Meagher. While the storefront footage didn't create any further leads, another surveillance video helped them take a huge leap forward. Using the cell phone data to track the path, the police tracked all the license plate numbers recorded on that route. They found some troubling evidence. A car that traveled the exact path of her cell phone belonged to a man with a violent past named Adrian Bailey. This 41-year-old man, Adrian Bailey, had a long criminal history that started when he was 18. In 1991, he raped a 16-year-old who was friends with his sister. The following year, he attempted to rape and threatened to kill a 17-year-old girl walking home from a bus stop. He was arrested about a week later when she was able to identify him to the police. This predatory individual was released on bail and attempted another sexual assault on a 16-year-old girl. She was hitchhiking before he abducted her in his car and drove out to a remote area where he attacked her. Again, his victim was able to identify him. He was arrested and jailed for 5 years with a minimum sentence of 3 years served. Somehow, this serial rapist was released earlier than the minimum at just 22 months. Later, he admitted that he went through the motions of rehabilitation simply to get an early release. He clearly had no intention of changing his despicable, violent acts, but convinced the authorities he was no longer a danger. Starting in September 2000, Bailey committed a series of assaults in the St. Kilda area of Melbourne. In a span of just over 6 months, he attacked 5 sex workers by trapping them in his vehicle and repeatedly raping them. By April 2001, he was arrested and pleaded guilty to 16 counts of rape and assault. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with a minimum and a non-parole period of 8 years. I have no doubt part of this light sentence had to do with these women being in the wrong line of work, as is often the case when sex workers are attacked. He was released on parole after serving 8 years and finishing another rehabilitation program. He was released in August 2011. Soon after, he saw a 20-year-old man eating at a cafe around 1:30 a.m. and started to verbally abuse him. He ended up punching this young man in the face, breaking his jaw and leaving him unconscious. He pleaded guilty and only served a 3-month sentence because the attack didn't raise any alarm bells. Apparently, ABC says this was because it wasn't a sex crime. A sexual assault is a violent crime. If someone with a past of assault attacks someone, what does it matter if it's sexual or not? It's still a troubling pattern of violent behavior from an individual who should clearly not be out among the general population. This serial rapist's traffic pattern was on the same route as Jill's phone, so the police immediately started investigating him as a suspect. They looked at his track record and knew they likely had their man in the blue hoodie. Police arrested Adrian Bailey at 2:30 p.m. on September 27, 2012, 5 days after Jill's disappearance. They took him into custody and began a lengthy interrogation. At first, Bailey denied any foul play and played innocent. He was out looking for his girlfriend at the time because women shouldn't be out alone at night. Meanwhile, the police combed his apartment for evidence and found the SIM card to Jill's phone in his laundry. When the police confronted him with physical proof of his guilt, his story changed and he began to crack. He admitted to being the man in the blue hoodie. He claimed that they had a friendly conversation and even went so far as to say he was trying to help her and she seemed distressed. Then he tried to kiss her. She got aggressive with him, so he began to see red, and before he realized anything, he had strangled her to death with his bare hands. He claimed that it was a horrible mistake. The detectives had a gut feeling that there was more to the story than what he was saying, but they did have the confession they needed and a way to find Jill's body. That night, After being persuaded, Bailey drove with the police to Gisborne, the town northwest of Melbourne where Jill's phone ended up. They drove around for hours and were about to give up when Bailey perked up and pointed to the woods nearby. He refused to show them exactly where he buried her and only pointed in the general vicinity. They found her partially clothed body under barely a foot of soil. She was just weeks away from her 30th birthday. At 2 a.m. on September 28th, Adrian Bailey was charged with the rape and murder of Jill Meagher. He had an out-of-session hearing that lasted a minute and a half and was held on remand pending the trial. While in custody, he attempted suicide. Some say he felt bad, but I think he simply didn't want to face the consequences of his malicious actions. This case received a huge response from her community and the media. This shocking crime was met with grief and anger at what had happened. They wanted to know why this man had brutally attacked a stranger in such an unimaginable act of violence. Similarly to what he said to police when they first brought him in, he told a psychologist that he tried to kiss and touch her on the street they were on. She responded by stepping back and slapping him across the face, and this enraged him. After he raped her, she hit him with her cell phone and attempted to call the police. He responded by strangling her. He said that at first he didn't know what to do and was sitting in the alley crying and shaking. He then left her there and drove home to get a shovel. He dragged her body into the car and drove to a remote location where he attempted to bury her. The discovery of Jill's body and this crime sent shockwaves through Melbourne. Everyone was devastated. The reporters at ABC who knew her from around the building were visibly shaken when reporting the terrible news. One radio tribute by her coworker was particularly heartfelt. John Fain shared an emotional moment paying his respects and saying, his voice cracking, "There is a very empty space in our office this morning." The headquarters of ABC ran their flag at half-mast to mark the loss. They put out a statement on their website, part of which said, "Jill was a much-loved member of the local radio family. She was witty, intelligent, and great company. Her friends and workmates at the ABC will miss her greatly." Jill was an innocent victim, a young, vibrant woman with her whole life in front of her. As news spread of her body being found, the Help Us Find Facebook page received 600 messages of condolences in just one day. Later that day, around 12 million Twitter timelines had referred to her. Some Facebook users started creating pages about the case. Some of them were openly hostile, and the police unsuccessfully tried to get them shut down. The social media got so vehement that the Premier of Victoria said it might be necessary to reform the law so that social media coverage could not influence an independent jury. Tom Marr backed these calls to have the pages taken down. Facebook refused, and the Victoria Police Chief Commissioner said that he was looking into legal counsel. Bailey's defense attorney filed a formal suppression order to ban the publishing of any damaging material about him until the trial. Some people went online to find his address and telephone number and located an A. Bailey. Before long, the number was flooded with abusive phone calls. Thing was, that wasn't Adrian Bailey's number. A man named Andrew Bailey had received the calls, but when the public found out it was a case of mistaken identity, the call stopped. Her death affected many people. Even the inmates being held at the remand center in Melbourne were deeply affected. Over 40 people attended a requiem mass in the prison chapel to pay their respects to Jill and honor her life. She was a Roman Catholic, and many people left bouquets at the church near where she lived, and they held a candlelight vigil in remembrance. On September 28th, in her hometown of Drogheda, Ireland, a memorial service was held at St. Oliver's Community College. Thousands attend to mourn her loss and remember the bright student they once knew. On September 30th, 2012, just 2 days after the body was found, a local photographer, Philip Werner, organized a public march, only expecting about 100 people to show up. Instead, over 30,000 people walked down Sydney Road in Brunswick in memory of Jill. Citizens of the community were deeply affected by this tragedy. After a minute of silence, Jill's mother, Edith, spoke to the marchers and thanked them for the support. This became about more than just a single woman. Jill became a reflection of the larger societal issues surrounding violence against women. This began a national discussion on the media talking about a topic that had gone largely ignored up until this point. On October 20th, the Take Back the Night movement had a march to raise awareness. In a preliminary trial in January 2013, a 2-day initial hearing was scheduled to start March 12, 2013. At this time, the news reported that Bailey intended to fight the charges against him. In a turn of events, on April 5, 2013, he pled guilty to the rape and murder of Jill Meagher. Bailey shared a statement that he was remorseful, but the prosecution pushed back, citing that he had tried to conceal what he did, and that showed he didn't regret it. The trial was highly significant, not just in terms of seeking justice for Jill, but also in raising awareness about the importance of safety. Whether or not things are safer for women remains to be seen. On June 19, 2013, Bailey was sentenced to life in prison to serve at least 35 years without parole. He was only given 35 years because of his last-ditch plea of guilt. After his trial for the murder of Jill Meagher, other cases came to light. He had 3 more trials. His sentence was increased to 43 years after he was found guilty of assaulting 2 sex workers and a Dutch backpacker in the months leading up to Jill's murder. Another victim, an 18-year-old sex worker, had been reading a pamphlet about a dangerous predator in the area when he pulled up and she got into his car. Apparently, she told him about this rapist on the loose, and he turned to her and said it was him. So creepy. Tom moved back to Ireland. Jill's parents stayed in Perth. He continued to advocate for victims' rights with the White Ribbon Campaign, the world's largest male-led movement to end violence against women. He spoke to the media about reforming the justice system to prevent this from happening again. Bailey was never given a full life sentence and continued to appeal his case. He got 3 years removed after his lawyer had him evaluated by a psychiatrist who said he had borderline personality disorder and was not psychopathic. It was also revealed that during his childhood, he was sexually abused by an older female relative and regularly suffered physical abuse at the hands of his violent father. He will be 80 by the time he is eligible for parole, and even then, he must be cleared by a board that proves he's no longer a danger to the public. Jill's tragic death sparked a national conversation about safety and the rights of women. Other cases where killers were allowed back into the community were brought to light. Just 2 months after Jill's murder, 22-year-old Sarah Cafferkey was murdered by a man with a violent past out on parole. Yet another example of someone who should have been behind bars for taking a woman's life. Unlike the seemingly lenient ruling for Adrian Bailey, the perpetrator was put away for life. 3 years earlier, another woman, Elsa Korb, was attacked, stabbed, and strangled by a man in a South Melbourne motel. He was a convicted who was also out on parole. Jill's case was the final straw that forced the government to take action. In June 2013, Victoria's parole laws underwent a massive overhaul. In the new laws put to Victorian Parliament, breaching parole would now be treated as a separate offense. In November 2020, Bailey's mother broke her silence and shared with a local radio station that she thought he shouldn't be on the streets ever. She had even tried to get him locked up before because she saw the pattern of violence her son was causing. She said the police failed to hear her warning and take action to prevent further violence. She went to various offices trying to make sure her son wouldn't be allowed in the general public, and she kept repeating that no one listened to her. It's important to remember that Jill was a young, attractive, middle-class white woman who worked in the media. The phenomenon of the missing white woman syndrome is real and speaks to the covert and not so covert ways racism and classism work together to elevate the value of certain women over others in an inherently unjust society. A 2014 academic article stated that Indigenous women are particularly at risk of violence, being 12 times more likely to be the victims/survivors of assault than non-Indigenous women. In rural and remote Western Australia, women are 45 times more likely to be assaulted by their spouse or partner than non-Indigenous women. The article goes on to state that Aboriginal women rarely report rape to the police given their track record of indifference and the unlikelihood of a conviction. Sadly, this mirrors the case of Indigenous women in North America as well as other marginalized groups. Community activists have raised awareness, but little is being done by government institutions to protect these women. It took the rape and senseless murder of an upper middle class white woman to create any kind of change in Australia, but anyone giving themselves a pat on the back because they went to one march or adjusted a couple laws is sorely mistaken. In more recent years, the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins and the violent deaths of Hannah Clark and her children resulted in public anger from women across the nation. So while most coverage of Jill Meagher concluded with a hopeful message that her death made lasting change, to end on that note here feels naive and too easy. Jill was someone who welcomed all and was full of life. What could honor her memory more than continuing to fight to protect those most ignored and underserved by systems of power? The same year of Jill's murder, the UN released recommendations for a specific national action plan on violence against Indigenous women. Despite a fourth action plan from the Australian government to reduce violence against women and children from 2010 to 2022, any lasting change is lacking. Indigenous women are exhausted by the efforts required to ensure the safety of their communities. They need the support of their government and for the public to speak out against gendered violence instead of leaving them out of the conversation. The conversation and continued dialogue around these issues must continue for any lasting change. While there's still a long way to go towards protecting all women, she is missed by all who knew her and hopefully remembered by you, our loyal viewers here at Killer Bites. Thank you for watching and tune in next time. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or needs support, please reach out to the free, confidential, 24/7 National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673 or visit rainn.org for more information. For more true crime stories, subscribe to Killer Bites.